Okay, so now that I've figured out how to make videos relatively easily, I'm going to try whenever possible to discuss this stuff as it comes up. And I was thinking about what I was kind of referring to in the last video, in that the difference between the mind states in the prenatal and the postnatal. And one way of characterizing it is that the feeling within the postnatal is that you're trapped in a mind state, that it has you in a certain sense. And so the goal is to be free from that trap, ideally. And I think that the prenatal suggests the way of going about doing that, which is to, when you find yourself within one of these states of mind, and typically it's going to be fire, or maybe water. I think those are the ones that it's the dominant, it's the primary axis of the postnatal. And so when we're engrossed in our hopes and fears, that's fire. And when we're experiencing the sensations that come about as a result of our efforts, that's water. And we're typically kind of floating between the two with these transition states as part of the story. But I think that these are on the vertical axis for a reason. The South, of course, is seen as the focal point, particularly. It's a historical thing that there's a tradition. The emperor always faces south. So in the northern hemisphere, you're going to be following the sun by looking south. And of course, the sun is the source. It's a representation of the source, I guess you could say. It's our particular local source, but in general, it represents a source in the abstract that does go beyond just our sun, of course. So you could say that's the difference between a pantheistic and a monotheistic view. So the pantheism is that everything, there's no real contradiction between pantheism and monotheism. Monotheism is the insight that within a cosmos of unbelievable power, there would be a source of sources, you could say. And the pantheism is that there are unbelievable powers at play in a variety of different ways throughout the cosmos. So in our local zone, there's a lot of things being brought to bear that are, well beyond our understanding. So I'm getting a little distracted. I'm kind of off on a tangent. But the thing that struck me a moment ago was the day-to-day that we're all involved in, and the difficulty of the thought states, the mind states that we're in. We recognize that we are a stressed-out people in general, and I don't know that there are many exceptions to that, speaking in broad terms around the globe. It seems that we're a very stressed-out species. And so at the same time, we know that we have the capacity to deal with incredible hardship. And we've seen historically, and many of us have seen in our own lives, the ways in which we and others are able to rise to the occasion in what we might have previously considered unthinkable circumstance. So it seems that the utility, is one of the things that I'm most concerned with. If I'm going to think about this stuff, I want it to be useful. So the utility here is to have a system of moving away from these encumbering, constricting, stress-producing states of mind and towards a reorientation of the mind that is more in line with our potential as children of God, if you like, as living sentient beings. And so the technique is, when you find yourself within the postnatal, so recall that, of course, it's the same states in both postnatal and prenatal. They're just differently arranged, right? And so it's in relation to each other that their character is changed. Just as we are different depending upon the relations that we have. In the various circumstances we get placed within, we behave somewhat differently. You can't behave exactly the same no matter what circumstance you're in. So when we're in the circumstance of thinking that what it is that we're after is to gratify our own senses, right? Then we are sort of trapped by this karmic cycle, and the mind states are a prison. But by realizing that, we have the opportunity to exit, and that exit can occur anywhere along the way when you realize, like let's say for example, that we realize that things are really screwed up. So that the inspiration in the post-heaven is, it's that point where you've kind of hit bottom and you're like, I gotta change, right? It all kind of comes together to a head, and it's like, okay, well then, yeah, what does it mean to change? What it means is you can't do it alone, right? That you're not God. You cannot know heaven. You have to be receptive, right? You find yourself in that state in the postnatal, right? But, the way to look at it really is, if we look at both of them, you find yourself in this postnatal heaven state. Okay, well, remember where heaven is in the prenatal, right? And remember what it's balanced by, right? So let's say, for example, concern about the future. It's the impetus. It's on the rising side here in the east, right? And you may well, I think of this as a representation of a day, right? You wake up in the morning. What's the first thing you remember, right? All the shit you got to do. And then you're like, oh man, I got all this. And then all the potential for the future, the potential disasters, the potential benefits, the potential in general is the next thing that kind of gets you out of bed so that you can, remember this is wind, right? So the future is out there somewhere, but in a certain sense you're sacrificing the future to do that thing that you did before because you feel like you got to keep doing it in order to get to what you want. Right? So let's say you find yourself in this position here in the morning, right? First thing in the morning, you kind of got that initial, just like as you're waking up, it's like, the memory of the night before, you could say, or like the memory of all the things that you're locked inside of, the mountain, right? That just seem to be an edifice that you can't escape, right? Stillness, there's no way to move it. Right? It's all in the past. And you're kind of a prisoner of it. And it's interesting to note that here you have not an inversion, but rather not an opposition, but an inversion. Because the mountain and thunder are flipped over from each other. So it's interesting to think about the difference between opposition and inversion. Because you can see how both of those operations are likely to happen within the mind. So it's sort of like playing things back and forward, right? You're playing it back first, remembering what your situation is, and then you're playing it forward. You're like, okay, what do I got to do? So you can feel the trap of that and notice, oh, I'm thinking of this as a trap. What can I do to relieve myself of that stress? Right? Well, you go to the prenatal then. So here, the opposite is what balances it out. Now it's interesting to note that the opposite of it is what we go to in the postnatal. Right? So Here we are in thunder. What we go to is wind. It's interesting. So we go there anyway, but we go to it involuntarily, and it doesn't balance it out. It's not on the opposite. It's a sequence, right? It's the next thing in a sequence. So it's not necessarily designed to correct this. What it does is you could say you're unaware of the complement that you get thrown into. But in the prenatal, the thunder can be balanced by the wind. And here we start to think about what it is that's actually inside of the container of the mind state, right? When we're in a materially oriented state and we're thinking about the future, we have that anxious sense that we have to make it happen. So there's the sense of the ego being the thing that has to solve the problem, right? And then we go on to engage in the activity that we think will bring about our desired result. But in the prenatal, we're recognizing that we're not really ultimately the agents of our own destiny. That there is a divine plan that goes beyond our own individual desires, and that is fundamentally more important than our own individual desires, because ultimately all of our own individual desires end the same way. Sure, some will have more temporary victories than others, but ultimately we're all defeated. We don't get to stay here forever. You don't live your life on top of the world. And then, at some point or another, we have to go. We have to fall. We're temporary, right? And so in recognizing that, we can be more accepting of our circumstance. And I'm not sure that necessarily means that we have to do any worse in life. You could make the argument that those people, the reason why everyone thinks in materialist terms is because those who fight the hardest for the material are going to get it. I don't know. Is that actually true? Maybe it's true on a short-term basis, but I just don't know. Maybe it is true. Maybe fundamentally, when you embrace a spiritual point of view, you're kind of screwed materially, but at least you get to have some peace of mind. Is it that harsh? I don't know. This is something that I wonder about. It does seem like you're going to be less inclined to fight, less inclined to compete harshly. But that doesn't mean you would be less inclined to do a good job at whatever you're doing, right? I see no reason why you can't have a balanced state of mind and go about doing many, many different things. Although it is very challenging, there's no doubt. There are plenty of occupations that do not lend themselves to a balanced state of mind, right? And of course, that's one of the reasons why there's so much stress. It's difficult to have a good time in the circumstances that we find ourselves in quite often. So it's a damn good question. I think that if we view it historically, we can say that clearly some human beings have been able to manage incredibly difficult situations with relative grace and composure and have found ways to enjoy life that others would find intolerable. So clearly the potential is there. And so that potential seems like it would be worth developing, particularly as things get ever more difficult. So these are some of the practical considerations that I think make this whole theory and the implications that seem to arise out of it really worth some serious thought, and I hope some discussion. That's in many respects what I'm really hoping to do by presenting this, is to clarify this material in my own mind with the assistance of other minds, because you can't do this kind of thing alone. You have to have some mirror in order to bounce ideas off of and get a sense of what really has legs and what doesn't. So again, I thank you for checking this out. I look forward to hearing from anyone who finds this interesting, and if you do think it's worthy of support, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I don't really know why. Well, I know to some extent why. I don't know if I've mentioned it elsewhere, but the reason I got interested in this stuff was because the prenatal arrangement is associated with a set of techniques in Tai Chi Chuan. So when I was studying Tai Chi Chuan, my master would quite often put up the prenatal arrangement and talk about how heaven is ward off, is the technique associated with it, and earth is receive-release, right? And water is press, and fire is push. And I just thought there's got to be a reason why that's the case. And actually, that'll probably be another video. Why are these trigrams associated with those particular techniques in Tai Chi Chuan? I'll make that video at some point. So that's how I got interested in it. But then I started to learn a little bit about Yi Jing, and I thought, well, there's got to be a relationship there. And that's going to be another video, too, is discussing how do these trigrams relate to the hexagrams of the I Ching. Yi Jing. So, all really interesting stuff. If you do find it interesting enough to pass on to other people who you think would find interesting, that would be awesome. I would love to hear from anyone, any thoughts that they have regarding this. And of course, if you want to support, please go to the link in the video description, patreon.com/taijireality, TAIJIREALITY, just like the channel name. And I will continue to post these as stuff occurs to me and time allows. Thanks for watching and listening. Adios.